everybody, and ARPA. Thank you for coming on a weeknight and a subject, as you see, not so palatable nor so easy to comprehend, but I must thank you for coming. I will also thank you after I finish, but this thank you has nothing to do with that thank you. Because then I will thank you for your patience or maybe for your whatever. That's another thank you. But thank you for coming. The reason why I chose ARPA, since we have been talking about ARPA so much, is because I consider ARPA some kind of an open university. You know, I've been trying or marketing the idea of open university for many, many years. That education should not be the monopoly of an institution. It must be open to the public, because eventually knowledge has to go to the public. It should not stay in universities. There must be a way of spreading knowledge, or whatever you find out, or new experiences. So ARPA is a sort of an open university, and a locale or a locale or an institute of no walls, no boundaries, no frontiers. There should be no boundaries, especially when it comes to knowledge, because knowledge, as you're going to see, is not just, you know, a theoretical matter. If it were theoretical, then the world would not have developed the way it has. So my title, as you know very well, the Armenian historical experience, the impasse, and the discourse. This may sound complicated, but it is not. I promise it is much simpler than it sounds. Usually language complicates. Don't worry, I mean complicated words have simple meanings behind, provided we work at them. Now I'll start with a quotation of mine, then we'll continue. If democracy is essentially a form of government in which the supreme power is vested in the people, then democratization of historical and political knowledge is a precondition. And the ignorance of the public is a symptom of the failure of the system. This is what I wrote as an endorsement for a book a colleague and a friend of mine wrote, Robert Betts, published last year. It was called The Sunni-Shia Divide in the Middle East. The Sunni-Shia Divide. Everybody knows what is Sunni and what is Shia. And it should have been Shia, but people cannot pronounce Shia, so Shia. It should be Shia. The point I tried to make with force was the following. Even though Islam, fundamentalism, and terrorism are at the center of US and international politics today, they are. Very few Americans know much about any of these issues really for what they are. Very few, if any. I mean, outside the establishment. The same is probably true of similar subjects about which the public as the true authority in a democratic system. The public is the authority in a democratic system. Other issues, the public must be knowledgeable, but it is not. For anyone to do anything freely and consciously, knowledge is a precondition and a right. You have a right to know. It is a democratic right, not any, you know, just, it's not simple, it's a right. This is the essence of democracy. If knowledge is my right and you're not giving it to me, then you are trespassing. You're not giving me my right. It is my right to know. In the case of Armenians, I mean our subjects, of course, is Armenians. The most vital subjects are what is most vital for an Armenian today? Basically two vital subjects. One, the preservation of cultural identity. That includes everything, including language. Secondly, the maintenance of an economic, politically viable system, our persistence, political persistence, which these days means economic persistence as well. Now, since the public is the matrix for everything, the ground for everything, both for persistence and identity, the first condition to maintain both is sound and comprehensive knowledge about all things Armenian. In other words, all Armenians must have accurate and unbiased knowledge of their history. This is the most elementary condition. Unbiased and objective knowledge. It is no secret that historical knowledge, as well as knowledge of the Armenian apostolic faith, that is important too, because it's part of our national structure, the faith. Even the knowledge of the language and literature are skeletal and dwindling. This is no secret. All our knowledge, it's getting less and less, it's dwindling. Celebrating religious feasts, enjoying the folklore of food, dance, song, and most of all lamenting and commemorating the past, both good and bad, cannot and do not provide the knowledge necessary for the maintenance of both identity and political persistence. These things are elementary. They will not help us there. This is the situation, and this is where I start. I must probably apologize to those who in principle insist on maintaining a rosy and calm image of things Armenian. I do apologize. I can see their concern and appreciate their good intentions. I'm as patriotic. I don't want to show the bad side. I mean, spread the linen, the dirty linen. But I do not share this type of patriotism. The color of reality may seem to be a relative matter. People see things differently. It may seem relative, but not in the case of, in the Armenian case. I've often said that on the economic and social levels, and individually, at present, the Armenians everywhere are in the best condition ever. Socially, economically, educationally, in every single sense, we are in our best condition ever. I mean, taken as a collectivity too. But the Armenian condition, or the condition of the nation as a whole, is neither rosy nor calm. I cannot help expressing this. This is how I see it. Fortunately, this is I look at the, surely it has been much worse, let's say. It has been much, much worse. We know this, don't we? And it could be better or worse in the future. I don't know. I look at the present, it is here and now. The past is not here anymore. The future does not exist. All we have is the present. We have to talk about it, and we have, in order to be factual on this level. No one can deny that all things Armenian must and can be improved. This cannot be denied, and often radically changed, that too. But there are 4 preconditions, I may repeat those. I see 4 preconditions to improve the Armenian condition. As I said, Armenians are in their best condition ever, but not the Armenian condition. That's another story altogether. But it involves the nation, the future, the prospect, the level of our development or whatever. Okay, precondition 1, courage to admit failure. When we fail, we must admit we failed. This includes parties, this includes institutions. People must have the courage to say, I was wrong, I failed. Let somebody else take over. I mean, I could not. Second condition, integrity to refuse whatever is marketed as truth. Not everything that is thrown at you as true is true. If I have integrity, I will have to first question whether what you're giving me as truth is true. Most of what is given to you as true is not true. You check out on your own. 3, the knowledge to analyze. Yes, everybody likes to analyze, but you must have knowledge for analysis. Analysis is a nice thing, criticism is but you must have basic knowledge to start with, you must be educated. Persistence, condition 4, to find and apply solutions for problems. It is not enough to lament or to talk. You must find a solution for what you're not happy about. So these are the conditions. This is neither pessimism nor optimism. Believe me, I don't like both terms. Pessimism and optimism are naive attitudes. I cannot be all pessimistic. I cannot be all optimistic. It's both depending on the circumstances. Actually, you're neither. You're above those. Sometimes you get optimistic, but then, cautious. My title summarizes my talk in 5 words. The Armenian historical experience, the impasse, and the discourse. My argument is the following. Every talk must have an argument. This is what my argument, the central argument. In view of the total historical experiences of Armenians, I mean all experiences, not just academics, not just ordinary people, everybody. In all locations and times, I stress all locations. Somebody from, let's say, Syria or Lebanon or Bulgaria or Turkey or wherever is part of the Armenian totality. You don't leave people out. All Armenians in all places, at all times. When we examine the humanities, the social sciences, the humanities means, languages, literature, arts, social sciences, history, sociology, psychology is questionable these days. Well, anyway, when I examine Armenian social sciences, humanities, intellectual and popular cultures, because there are popular cultures and there are intellectual cultures, we see that these experiences are barely reflected upon. We never analyze the experience of the totality of Armenians everywhere at all times. They haven't been put to, the knowledge of these things has not been used. In order to shape a solid modern people, you must base all your decisions on the entire field of experiences everywhere and of all the people. We haven't done that. More importantly, the public is not given a chance nor the enthusiasm to acquire knowledge, historical knowledge, in order to have an active part in the processes. When somebody is ignorant, he cannot be part of processes because he's ignorant, or he won't be interested in the first place because there's nothing there for him to do. As a result, there is a stalemate and then impasse. This is what a stalemate, a frozen situation in the intellectual culture, in the social sciences in particular. The way out is open discourse. Discourse is this kind of, debate. Through making historical knowledge not only available, but attractive and relevant. History courses, as Mark was saying, history courses in our classes, I mean, the elementary classes that we took history, were not attractive because as children we knew it wasn't history, it was epic. It was a narrative. In Armenian, narrative is badun, not badun, it's a badun. In other words, just, stories written here and there, like Armenian, like whoever, even, well, I will not go into that at this point. Anyway, the way out is it must be relevant, it must be attractive. I do believe that if you make knowledge attractive and relevant, anybody would want to know. But if you give him a stale, meaningless story, then, as we were in class, I must admit we hated those classes. Nothing for me to take anything from. New knowledge, I stress new knowledge, may and will change our horizon. It will force us to form a new horizon and new peripheries. New knowledge should make a difference. It must be given to the public. It will increase our awareness of ourselves and make us part of historical processes. When you're aware of yourself and when you're aware of history, you're part of the process. You can be part of the process. In sum, appreciating history as a living tradition is important. History is not a dead tradition. It's not about something that is gone and beyond. Being part of a living tradition is engaging oneself in an ongoing discourse. For example, when I keep asking, I'll give a very simple example. Why did the genocide happen? See, I keep questioning. I am in a discourse with events, but in order to be an active part, I must have knowledge, accurate, unbiased, solid knowledge, not of our main authors, of all the authors. So knowledge is a prerequisite, but I must get myself into this discourse in order for me to be part of the historic process. I'll go into the other discussion from this one. Discourse may turn into conflict. This is interesting. When people talk, debate, it will turn into conflict. We know this, don't we? The minute we start talking, the next thing you know is what? We may beat each other. Well, it doesn't matter as long as we're interested in what we're talking. Anyway, because those who have an interest, it may turn into conflict. You know why? Because those who have an interest in keeping things as they are, like for example, you stick to the story of Vartanans, okay? And don't get out of that. Just stick to that story. Because some people have an interest in keeping things as they are, they will refuse to change. And the debate may turn into open war, right? As it does. Few years before the Vartanans War in 451, one of the greatest figures of the 5th century, the guy on whom I wrote my BA dissertation, Yeznik Ukhbati, said, life is a war and he who has the most powerful weapon will win, just before the Vartanans battle. Around 449, that's when he wrote this. He also said, he who wants to look at the sun, meaning the truth, must clear his eyes first. You cannot look at the sun with colored glasses because you will see the sun in a different color. So you must clear it. He meant that he who is eager in seeing the truth must first put aside prejudice and false opinions. These were supposed to be the first principles of a strong and coherent national culture, but they never materialized. Yazid was pushed into oblivion and was kept there for a long time until in the 11th century he was discovered. Why do you think so? Why did other authors, why were they famous and Yazid was never recognized? You can see the reason why, because he went against the grain. He was kind of different from everybody else in his time. Now, of all the weapons, as far as I see, self-knowledge is the most powerful. You should know who you are, exactly your size and your capacities. And of course, there must be the will to work. Two sentences, or dictums as we call it, were carved on the pediment of the temple of Apollo in the 6th century BC. The first was nothing too much. Two sentences, 6th century Apollo. The god of philosophy and wisdom and poetry. Nothing too much, also meaning nothing too little. This became the principle of Aristotle's ethics. Nothing too much, nothing too little. You must find the golden mean, which is yours. If I'm diabetic, that much is enough sugar for me. If I'm an ordinary athlete, a young man, then my sugar, my golden mean is much closer to the excess than it is to the deficiency. Anyway, the second one interests me, know thyself, which the Armenians translate as zanir skez. Zanir skez, know thyself. Almost 2 centuries later, that's in the 4th century, actually late 5th century, Socrates adopted this dictum, know thyself principle, and used the method of dialectic of discourse. It's a famous method, by the way. You say something, I say something, and then we go on and then we debate, and then we come up with a final conclusion. He used this know thyself. In other words, he used the method of dialectic in order that you know yourself and I know myself. Eventually, we realize who's right and who's wrong and where is the truth. Maybe neither of us is true. Maybe truth is beyond us, so we get there. So the method of discourse, and this is what I'm proposing today. Let's debate, let's discuss this, so let's see how far we can go. Now, analyzing the Armenian condition in historical context, I insist you cannot analyze anything outside historical context. Everything is part of a historical process. Nothing exists outside history. For example, what happens to the Armenians of Aleppo today, can I talk about it outside what's happening in Syria today? I cannot. It's historical context is the key for everything. So this is an activity of knowing myself. In other words, I should know where I come from, where I'm going, what's happened, and where will I go. It's all history. The problematic, that's my problem, in French, the problematique as they call it, or the issue is, how much do we know, common Armenians, you and me, we're common Armenians, how much do we know, if anything at all, about the realities of the historical experiences of the Armenians as they were. As they were. Not as they were presented in circulating narratives. As they were. That's not an easy thing to do. Because you have to find out how they were, because the narratives are not helping us there. Anyway, the narratives are mainly told by historians, politicians, even travel agents tell you stories about Armenia they know nothing of. Parties, media, whatever. So these are all stories going around. Most of it, people don't know if it's true or not. Now, they are all interpretations. And they serve special interest. Therefore, there is an urgent need for a collective and comprehensive process of re-evaluation through new knowledge, not the old knowledge that's been going on, new knowledge for a true cultural transformation. We do need a cultural transformation. By culture, I mean every level of our social life. Now, so far I implied, actually I smuggled, I must admit, 3 very controversial points about history. Very controversial. Without, I don't know if you felt that I did smuggle 3 very basic ideas. One of them is that history is not a fixed narrative. All the histories that are written out there are not final narratives. History is not a fixed narrative. It is not a story that I can say. It's not a police report. Even police reports are not very objective. So, history is a process of experiences. It is a dynamic process of experiences. There are no presuppositions, there are no fixed essences, there are no fixed formula. Nothing is fixed. Everything you find out, everything you have to explain in context. People and episodes are products and factors. There is nothing fixed there. Everybody is the product of his circumstances. Everybody is a factor in another situation. We must start from well-documented, specific cases. There are no general stories. You start from very specific cases that are very well documented. If they're not documented, that testimony is worthless. There are many, many episodes, but one person has talked, just one source, and nobody else. How can I possibly take this as the final truth? And most of our stories are based on one testimony. I will come to the nature of Armenian historiography, medieval or modern or even contemporary for that matter. In other words, and we should never make generalizations without, emotionally or essentialistically, and we do that a lot. Generalizations about ourselves. that are totally baseless. This is one. If I had said this, for example, somewhere else, in another audience, I can do this in ARPA, by the way. I cannot do this anywhere, in many, many places. I just cannot generalize. If I don't have specific cases enough to empower me to generalize, I better not come up with generalizations because they are 99% incorrect. Secondly, I implied a specific approach and method. I imply that if you approach history, your approach must be critical. There is no shame if you say that, did the Balkan Baderazm happen or not? And the way it was told. I have every right to ask the question. Then I should go and find out who talked about this event, how many sources there are. The critical attitude is an absolute must. There is no authority in history. Nothing anybody says is final until I cross-examine, until I find several sources and the truth meets in those sources. If I do not find the same truth in 3 or 4 sources, then that truth is under suspicion until I can prove that. Until I prove that, especially in Armenian history, especially, most of the truth is not in Armenian history books or medieval books, but in Arab sources, Byzantine sources, Syrian sources, Iranian sources. The truth is everywhere, except in the reason why I come to why Armenian historiography is not that is not so trustworthy, especially medieval, even contemporary history. So, in other words, there should be no passive acceptance of standardized stories. There are standardized stories. I never passively accept anything that is told in all the books. By my own experience, I'm telling you why what I read did not match with what I discovered personally. They just did not match what I found. Thirdly, I'm strongly suggesting that even though historiography is a literary and specialized field, often a vehicle of patriotism, let's admit our history is a vehicle of patriotism and of course inspiration, it is also a context for questioning. History is a context for self-analysis, self-knowledge, self-identification, and the context to develop the historical sense. This is a very, very technical term, the historical sense on individual and collective levels. What is the historical sense? It's a technical term, by the way. Historical sense is a relatively recent concept. Now, about 150 years old, not a very old concept. It means an awareness of the historical past, an awareness of the historical past as part of the present. The past is not just past, it is part of the present. For example, I'm born in Aleppo. Aleppo is part of my present. It's been how many years? But it is still part of my present, because that's who I am. Where I come is part of what I am today. So, it also means, historical sense, actively being part of historical processes. Am I an active Armenian today? Saying I'm an Armenian, speaking Armenian, doesn't mean being Armenian. How actively I am part of what is going on today, the processes. What is my role? This is actively taking part in the historical processes. You're not somebody on the margin. You're not a fly on the ceiling. If you're an Armenian, then you should be part of what is going on, the processes today on the ground. That is the historical sense. The historical sense is also an existential effort. Without which I cannot live. Existential effort to make sense of one's actual condition. What does it mean to be an Armenian in Aleppo, then in Beirut, then in New York, then in LA, then wherever, then in London, wherever I've been, right? What does it mean to live as an Armenian in a given context? It means many, many things. I just cannot pass over these things. I have to make sense for my own peace of mind. I will never find peace of mind, by the way, if I keep questioning myself. But that doesn't matter, because the idea is to keep on questioning yourself. Because who am I if I'm an Armenian? I'm not just a plant on the side of the street. I should be, as a human being, I should be aware of what I'm doing. So the thing is to develop the historical sense in the public, individually, collectively. Does this happen in universities? Does this happen in ARPA? Does this happen in Abril bookstore? Does this happen in Hamaskain or wherever? It must happen someplace where the historical sense must be awakened in people, but it's easier said than done anyway. As I see this educated sense of the self, I stress, educated sense of the self. Saying that an Armenian is not an educated sense of the self. Saying that my mother and everybody is Armenian, that is not an educated sense of the self. That is just a mechanical, you know, mechanical thing. Okay, I come from Armenian parents, that's the end of the story. Not quite, that is not the story. It means being part of history and being active part of it. Okay, anyway, having heard a few episodes, everybody knows what is the Vartanans, everybody knows the Krerokyu, you know, the discovery of the alphabet, everybody knows other battles, everybody knows about, let's say, the Pakradunian Harstuchun, you know, the Pakradunian kingdom, everybody has heard of Vaspuragan, the Arjuni kingdom, the Sunik, especially as we keep on going, you know, Armenia, we're learning, you know, archaeology, architecture does teach you some things, but then it doesn't really teach you much. There is a stagnation, especially in the way we intellectually reflect upon this history. The reason I say there is a stalemate, there is a dead end, there is a stalemate, there is an intellectual stagnation. I stress on the intellectual side, the people who are supposed to be writing, rewriting history, giving us new knowledge. So there is a stagnation, there is a serious stalemate in our social sciences, and there is an impasse. We have come to a point where our social sciences, our history, sociology, have nowhere else to go. And the way they have been moving, actually they're not moving. They are not moving. From, guess what? The 5th century model. The 5th century model of Armenian history was all rejuvenated, renewed, revisited during the Armenian awakening by the, of course, Mekhitaris, and then, of course, the figures of the Armenian Beratunum, so to speak. That's 19th century. Still the historians were church clergy. Still the mentality was the same. When later on in the Soviet Armenia, there was this new wave of intellectual, you know, classes, they didn't deviate from the traditions, and we are stuck on the same track of thinking about ourselves and stuck with the same narratives, which is a sad thing, by the way. Now, at this point, I have this following statement. It's almost an argument. If national identity that we talk about all the time, don't we? Asking inclusion, how to preserve it, or whatever, is primarily an awareness of historical and cultural content. Content is the most important. If you're aware of yourself, you must know of your content. Then scraps of information, this crumbles of information, do not constitute knowledge, and identity turns into an empty feeling that I'm an Armenian, full stop. I know nothing about myself historically. Those who market epics and invest on a vast tragedy like the genocide. By the way, unfortunately, many people are investing on the genocide. It's just an investment. Actually, there is so much more people should know as Armenian history. Most people know a few events plus the genocide. They should know that only comprehensive knowledge of the entirety of the experiences make historical sense. These scraps of information don't make the historical sense. Everywhere such practices almost killed all sense and taste of history, if not the historical sense altogether. If we keep on talking about few events, then people will not develop any historical sense whatsoever. So we better start rethinking of what we're feeding the people by way of this. This is why we insist on the idea of open university. Knowledge must come out of the university. Universities must have no walls. And knowledge must have no walls. And the only way to do that is to come up with organizations or programs or be aware of what's happening like this. The situation has not been much better in the near and remote past. By the way, Armenians haven't known much about their history in the past. The public has been given little knowledge by way of facts, even though Armenian studies today, this is very important. This is something for another lecture maybe. Today, Armenian studies are in the best condition, physically. There are 16 centers for Armenian studies in the US. They're very well provided. They are all endowed, at least to 3 million per center. Tell me how many PhDs do they produce during the past 40 years? 40 PhDs, only from 16 centers. Even though they proliferated, I mean these centers, in Europe as well, by the way, in many universities. Armenian studies in its best is in its best condition today. Number-wise, the non-Armenians involved in this, all that. However, the knowledge of Armenians, of themselves, has decreased. Now these centers have contributed nothing to the public. Absolutely nothing. The public knows nothing. The centers, I mean, the knowledge, if there is new knowledge, I'm sure there is, many publications, this knowledge is not getting out of the centers and the books. As long as they're kept there, then they're useless. What matters for me is the public. Never mind what they find, never mind what they discover. If the knowledge is important, it must be relevant, and it must cause a change in the public. It must cause a change. For example, when Copernicus talked about the sun being the center of the universe and not the earth, or later on, much later, after 500 years, the Big Bang theory is being developed, or all the, even Einstein's relativity, did that change the life of the public? No. Because that's not the kind of knowledge I'm talking about. I'm talking about existential knowledge, the knowledge of your past which will change your present. It will make a difference. It will teach you something that, I mean, is this what I was, honestly? Then this is what I should be doing today if I really want to survive collectively and individually. This is the kind of knowledge. This is relevant knowledge, which is one of the most important concepts in historical hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the science of or the philosophy of interpretation. They stress one point, relevant knowledge. In other words, there are, of course, you discover many things, but there are some things that you discover after which your life changes and you're not the same person anymore. That's the kind of knowledge I'm stressing. New knowledge, Armenian historical knowledge, should be provided to the public in such a way that the public will feel interested in history, intrigued by Armenian history, and see themselves totally differently from all those made up fake stories. Okay, as a result, I'm saying that as a result of the situation, huge gaps have developed, and the public knows nothing or more. Now, the way out, you have to, I don't know, you can disagree with me. There is indifference, there is ignorance, there is alienation. And if some people are dissolved, or ayna serum, ayna serum guys, people are being dissolved, if they are, because they find nothing to get hold of, to something that makes sense to them, for which they will do what they're doing. Not that you ask them, they will want to do what they should be doing in order to preserve. So the way out, according to me, you please do, I mean, if you have to disagree, we'll talk about it later. The way out is to open channels, just paths, between these three sides of a triangle. This is the triangle. The public, the public, the scholars, and the historical experiences, the knowledge. The scholars, the public, the knowledge. You have to connect them. The public should know, the scholars should give the public, and in such a way that when scholars contact the public, their knowledge will be rejuvenated. They will know what the public wants, what the public needs. Or then the knowledge must be renewed. So you have to connect the public knowledge and scholarship. So this is the triangle. I'm sure the public will be interested when you give them new knowledge. But when you give them the old stuff, nobody cares anymore, do they? Because it's uninteresting. It doesn't apply. For example, somebody like my family, they come from Iran, okay? Then into Turkey, then they have been driven to Aleppo, right? Then nobody is left in Aleppo, everybody is either in Beirut or in... actually, the family has never been on the mainland, Armenia. Because, many like, I mean, we're not exceptions. There are so many like us, okay? Then when you start thinking about the Hellenic, okay, how come, I've never been to Hellenic. My family has never been to Hellenic. What is the connection between me and the Hellenic or the historical mainland? You must relate this. You must relate the ordinary Armenian to the concept of Hellenic. Why is the Hellenic, the meaning of the thing? You have to relate people to their past and to their present condition. And scholarship should assist people to think, to analyze, to give them information. For example, I'll come to this. When I went into the subject of Armenians in the medieval Islamic world, it was the very first time anybody was thinking about the subject, because that's where we have been living, aren't we? If you live in Iran, you're in the Islamic world, aren't you? And how? If you're living in Iraq, Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Turkey, of course, I mean, of all the places, Azerbaijan, right? And wherever, North Africa, Egypt, where do you think you're living? You are living in the Islamic world. For how long? From the beginning of Islam, which is 7th century. Now it's been 14 centuries. Who has bothered to think about our condition under Islamic rule? Of millions of Armenians. And plenty of material. Open any book of Arabic history, any Arabic book of history, as of the 7th century to the present, it's full of information about Armenians. What have Armenians written about their interaction with Islam? What has Islam meant for Armenians? Why haven't we ever asked the question? Our present neighbors in the Republic, how many, out of the four, how many are Muslim? Azerbaijan, Iran, Turkey. Out of four, three are Muslim. Have we understood Islam as a political culture, as a cultural, as a way of life? No one bothers to. What is the matter with us? If we have historians, something has gone very, very wrong. Now, by the way, what's happening in Aleppo today? Fundamentalists attacking Armenians, not to mention our dear old Turkish neighbors. What is going on in Aleppo? Will any Christian survive in the Middle East after a while? Not too long a future, not a very far future, very short while. Anyway, in this section, I just have to, I make this in my small abstract too. History is too serious a matter to be left to professional historians, politicians and actors. History belongs to the people, they should claim their rights. History, we shouldn't let historians decide history and then hatch their books and keep them in libraries, and the public is fed nothing but nonsense. History is a living experience. We better make sure that it becomes part of the living present. Otherwise, history is not the business of historians. By the way, I have no respect for professional historians, because many of them are in some other world, totally disconnected from the people. Or some of them are not smart enough to my taste. Or some of them are too biased. Or some of them don't have the capacity to get out of the box or to think in different paradigms. We'll talk about paradigms, but this is more or less the background of my work. I've been working on this for the past 20 years. It should make a difference. Now, I chose the Armenian experience in the Islamic world. Not that please do not put me in small context. It isn't because Armenian in the Islamic world is the most important subject. Absolutely not. There are more important things for me, much more important. I'm a philosopher, and there are really fascinating subjects. Why did I choose the Armenians in the medieval Islamic world? One, because there is a requirement of location. Being born in Aleppo, then Beirut, our first language is Arabic, right? Like everywhere else. Then, by the requirements of the place, you learn Arabic, you know the Arabs, you know the Muslims, you live with them every day, you know about Islam. As a philosophy student, I studied so much about Islamic philosophy, Islamic civilization, Islamic history. I mean, it's just there. And then you know so much about yourself as an Armenian, and then you know about, I found myself in a position where I felt that this is something I must do. I mean, there are requirements for anybody to do. This is something I must do. It has never been done. If I don't do it, I don't know anyone from back, Lebanon, Syria, who will do this. I don't think anybody will venture into this kind of, because no sources, nothing, nothing, nowhere to go. All you have to do is go to the Arab sources, read everything that's written about Armenians, read about the local histories, then you can figure out the position of Armenians in that part of the world. Besides, in 1984, I wrote a book on Armenian painting in Lebanon. That was my first book, exactly 30 years ago. This is the 30th, almost this month. the Armenian painting in Lebanon in the light of crisis of identity. Because, you know, painting is an art that we developed only in Lebanon, I see that. Do you know that we never had any art of painting from where we come? How come Armenians like Galens, you know, the orphans generation, later on, Diran Ajemian, or everybody else in that generation, why would they come to Lebanon, actually find themselves in Lebanon, not come, driven into Lebanon, and then out of all the arts, practice painting, in the year 1955-60, half of all the painters in Lebanon and Syria were Armenian. Half. In 1965, there were 500 exhibitions, yearly exhibitions in Beirut. This was the golden age of Beirut. About 350 were those of Armenian painters. Doesn't this make you think? It is something, it's very conspicuous, it's very, very striking. So I had to find out the reasons. I wrote that book under bombardment, then the manuscript was on the green line, finally, anyway, the book was out. This would, if I wanted to write that book today, of course I couldn't. The painters are, 3/4 of them are dead, some of them are out, their work is scattered. That was something, if I had not done it at that moment, under bombardment, it wouldn't have come out, and it did come out. There you are. See, this is that kind of book that if you don't do it, it will not be done. It's just, and you do it. I don't regret it, of course. It wasn't easy, but you have to do it. You have to be part of the historical present. This is Lebanon. I'm Lebanese. I love art. There's something that is so close to me. This is close to me too. In other words, how come? I mean, how are we going to live in this part of the world with Islamic fundamentalism being what it is today, right? It's another development. Anyway, I did find large holes in Armenian historiography. Our presence in the Middle East has never been conceptualized. I do insist, and please don't take me wrong, despite all my respect for Armenian historians of Armenia today, and all the others, I mean, there's so much material there. But no one ever thought that Armenian history is part of Near Eastern history. For example, I was talking the day before yesterday in UCLA. Do you know that the Armenian kingdoms, that is Bakraduni, Armeni, and Sunni, I mean, there are many, but these are the major ones. Do you know that? Yes, these were kingdoms, I mean, more or less. The word used very conditionally, very, very conditionally. It was nothing but part of Abbasid policy. All they wanted was to have these kingdoms, the so-called kings, to collect the taxes, to stand as guards of the Abbasid empire. They encouraged those kingdoms, they put these kings on their thrones, they supported them. They weren't really sovereign kings. Have you ever understood Abbasid politics? We were part of the Abbasid world. These kingdoms were not free sovereign kingdoms. Even the Byzantines never recognized Armenian kings. They said, you know, these are just nothing but our subjects. Why do we make a big deal out of our kings? Why don't we place all these kingdoms in 10th, 11th century Islamic history? We were part of the Islamic world. For example, we had a 50-year kingdom in Erzincan. Actually, I discovered that there was another triangle kingdom, Erzincan, Kilikia, and Zakarians on the mainland. That's a triangle. Has anybody thought that this triangle was a Mongolian triangle at the time? That they were all subjects of the Mongols? No. Why don't we relate facts? Why don't we think in terms of Mongol politics, Turkish politics? Do you know that we have a long history we have a Turkish Armenian realpolitik? In other words, due to our alliance with the Turks, Seljuk Turks, actual Turks, part of Cilicia was saved from the Byzantines and Crusaders, both Christian by the way, through Mleh, Prince Mleh, who was an ally of Nuruddin Zengi of Aleppo, the Turk, and he cleared Cilicia and prepared it, and a decade later it became a kingdom. At the same time, National Ali was negotiating with the Byzantines for union of church. Why do we forget the variety, the beauty of history? Otherwise, people talk about Cilicia as if it was a miracle. Absolutely not. It belonged to a period that nobody has ever studied. I mean, I do modestly claim having discovered entire episodes, entire periods, that do not exist in Armenian history. So I mean, we have looked at history with half an eye, not even one eye. Half an eye. If you look at with half an eye, from a very narrow perspective, you miss the whole history. This is very, very important in our history. Then we are very Armenocentric. We talk about ourselves and we forget that we think we live on a different planet. That's not the case. Absolutely not. For example, the history of Armenians of Lebanon, from 300,000 to 40,000 today, is it not part of history of Lebanon? The history of the Syrian Armenians today is part of history of Syria, right? If you want to write about history of American Armenians, this is part of American history. Not just Armenian history, it's part of American history. So we always forget the context, and we talk about ourselves as if we are totally isolated. So this is one very important, Armenian historiography has failed. The reason I will not go into a psychological analysis, why do Armenian historians fail? By the way, when I taught that, Hagop made a very, very interesting point. When I taught at Yerevan University, I was supposed to teach 1 year, but then I survived 1 semester. So I taught at the Department of History, Department of Oriental Studies, and Department of International Relations. I realized that there is, I wouldn't say unconscious, but there is an effort to separate everything Armenian from everything else. If you keep doing this, then you will get nowhere. You should know what everybody else is doing and where you're standing so that you will know what you're supposed to be doing. Basically, this was the shock. There is an effort to keep, an insecurity, I would say, to stand aloof, especially in social sciences. Especially in social sciences. Otherwise, the other sciences are okay, but otherwise, we have a problem with self-knowledge. We have a problem with mirrors. We have a problem with mirrors, for one. Anyway, Armenocentrism, and the other thing I seriously criticize is the problem of ideologies. We think ideology moved Armenians. That is totally wrong. Armenians have survived because of realpolitik, because of they have survived circumstances, because they have done what should be done for that moment in order to survive and to acquire power. We're not simple survivors. Absolutely, we are people who not just power survive. We want power. We want riches. We want education. So we are pragmatic people, and much more cruel than other people think we are. We are not that nice people. If we were that nice, we wouldn't have survived. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. For example, about 6 months ago, I was giving a lecture at Beirut, and there were 2 Armenian scholars. I said the Cilician princes matched their enemies, who were, of course, the Crusaders on the one hand, the Seljuks in the north, and then the Turks on the east, and of course the Mamluks. Very violent people. They said they matched their enemies in cruelty, which is true. This man was scandalized. Armenians are not cruel. Well, how could they survive 300 years if they were cruel? You think you can survive that kind of neighbors if you're not cruel and powerful? They were extremely cruel people, extremely pragmatic. I mean, they would do anything. They would do anything, and they did, and they survived 300 years. You cannot, I mean, Armenians are not nice people. Why would they be nice? Is being nice a moral problem in history? I mean, see, this is ideology. Or people did what they did because they were Christians. That is total nonsense. It isn't for the sake of Christianity. It's for the sake of probably survival, for other reasons. But there is no ideology because they could not afford ideology. There was no ideology. There is no Armenian ideology. There is Armenian survival. There is Armenian existence. There is Armenian experience. And you better not, make up stories about Armenians. Armenians are like just any other people, only smarter wherever they have been, in order to survive so long. That remains to be seen anyway. Now, I don't know if you have any patience, I can go very fast on volume 1 to 3 about the basic. The first one is on the Arab period, and I have I have many divergences from classic stories. For example, I have problems with the way Armenian Christianity has been talked about, especially during the Islamic period. I think the history of Armenian Christianity is not written yet. Whatever is written is the history of the church. The history of the church is not the history of Armenian Christianity. Armenian spirituality, spiritual culture is much richer, much vaster, much more interesting than the history of the church. The history of the church is the history of the institution. But then religious culture is much bigger, much, much bigger. Besides, we have had, you know, I mean, we lived in a point, in a location where we were always in the conflict spot of East and West. We have always been between superpowers. That's not an easy position. That has really affected our spiritual culture, political culture, social circumstances. And then, by the way, Arab rule, just to give an example, Arab rule is often very misunderstood. For example, Armenia was divided in 387, right? Then it was again divided. Then 450 something. Anyway, it kept being divided, okay? When the Arabs came, they united. Because it's one province, right? And it became much bigger. Armenia, when Arabs say Armenia, it's a much bigger area than the historic homeland. So when Arab historians began writing, by the way, Arabs are very famous for their historians and geographers. Do you know that we had no geographer after Anania Shiragati, who wrote something, but not quite? If today I want to find out about any Armenian medieval city, do you know where I go? Arab histories. They were really, because it was an empire, they wanted to know their land. So these Arab geographers wrote about everything. For example, do you know that Ibn Hawqaz wrote about Zwartnot? The only testimony about Zwartnot is an Arabic testimony. He says when you went in and then he starts describing, it's the only testimony about Zwartnot, an eyewitness account. So Armenian historians, Arab historians, when they wrote about Armenians, they wrote about all the Armenians in the entire Eastern Anatolia, all the way to Georgia, to the Caspian, down there. And they also wrote about all Armenians wherever they met. This means there were many Armenians in Syria, Palestine, of course North Egypt, wherever, North Africa. So if you want information on Armenians, go to Arab sources. And they talk about Armenians very casually, like a social type. They talk about Christian Armenians, Chalcedonian Armenians, Muslim Armenians, other heterodox Armenians, some worshipping Armenians, which were nothing but the Todragians, by the way, and so on and so forth. Turkish Armenian realpolitik, and then I also discovered that Armenians, quite smart people. The Prophet Muhammad moved from Mecca to Medina in the year 322. He died in 332, 10 years in the city of Medina. 632. I'm sorry, 632. During those 10 years, from 622 to 632, Armenians have gone to him in Medina, Armenians of Jerusalem, to come to an agreement with him that we will obey you, we will pay you all the taxes, only let us be the most important element in Jerusalem, I mean the state, the Christian state. And then later on, when Omar occupied Jerusalem, about a decade or so afterwards, Omar also gave them a pact, an oath, a promise, that I am renewing Muhammad's promise to Armenians to keep all these, the Church of Ascension and so on and so forth, okay? Another one. Then in the year 1187, when Salahuddin, occupied from the Crusaders, Salahuddin, that letter of Salahuddin, that oath, or ahad as they call it, is an authentic one. There he says that I am renewing the Prophet's oath to Armenians for them to worship their, to follow their religion freely and teach us so on and so forth. In other words, there is a whole tradition of an oath of the Prophet to the Armenians. Why hasn't anybody studied it? I am modestly saying that. Why shouldn't we know the protocols between Armenians and the Muslims and Islam? Armenians have understood the type of religion Islam is then, but not today. Why every time they had arguments with Muslims, for example, in the 14th century, record that says, have you forgotten the oath of Muhammad to the Armenians? When we see on so on and so forth. They keep bringing up the idea. Later on, when Shah Abbas took that many Armenians from Vaspuragan to Isfahan, he has also found a copy of Ali's promise and Omar's, and rewritten something on that basis and given to the bishop. That letter exists at the prelacy of Norjuva today. You know, these are traditions we haven't even studied yet. Anyway, from volume 2, I'll only give you one passage, just by almost looking like a chronicle. Listen to this. I mean, those who come up with monolithic stories of Armenians, those who come up with, you know, silly stories of Cilicia or whatever. Listen to this. Between the years 1154 and 1162, while in northwestern Syria, Cilicia and Eastern Asia Minor alliances were changing, Turkish Zengi Nuruddin was unsuccessfully trying to break into Crusader strongholds on the coast. You know, the Crusaders were there around by the year 1100, they were already in Jerusalem. So in 1098, they took, of course, Antioch. Anyway, he was trying to get into Crusader strongholds on the coast. Another Armenian, see, another Armenian, the Nusayri, you know what's Nusayri? The religion of today's Assad family. Alawi is a more general, they were Nusayri. Nusayri Imami means 12er, never mind. Visit Talab al-Luzik in Fatimid Egypt was encouraging the Turks and the Zangis to volunteer to drive the infidels and the pigs from the holy cities. Let's all get these pigs out. He is Armenian, right? He's a Muslim. He's encouraging a Sunni to go and fight the Crusaders in Jerusalem, half of which was defended by Armenians. I mean, look at these Armenians. One is, Talab al-Luzik, the other one, Baleh, working with Nuruddin. Okay, at the same time, that these Armenians are collaborating with Muslims of all types, Cilician Armenians, or Armenians in Cilicia, were the most important allies of the Crusaders, right? Or the infidels and the pigs. So one group is with the infidels and the pigs, another group is saying, let's get these pigs out of the city, okay? And they were taking part in all the Crusader campaigns against the Muslims. So Armenians were fighting Armenians. At many occasions, you find Armenian Cilicians fighting Armenians who are allies of the Muslim powers. I mean, they are involving all kinds of, you cannot simplify that Armenians were doing this and that. You have to know more details about these times. Now, in Cappadocia, or Cappadocia, Muslim Armenian, Georgian, Vratsi, Georgian Armenian, Danishmandits, or the Liberians, were of course fighting the Crusaders. And the Byzantines at the same time, occasionally Cilicians too. These are other types of Armenians, okay? There are Chalcedonian Armenians, let's say Neresa or whatever. There were all sorts of Armenians. At this very time, when Malek was using Turkish troops in order to free Cilicia from the Christians, at the same time, Nerses Shnorani, who died in 1173, was negotiating with the Greeks to unite the Armenian church with the Greek church. I mean, which Armenian historical experience should I really concentrate on? Can I simplify? When I have at least 5 examples that contradict each other. So the Armenian experience is much richer than you think it was. Everyone in their own location, everyone for their own interest was choosing their politics. Now the Armenian history, especially of those times, is much more complicated than people think. Another thing, for example, I talked about this in volume 3. When the Patriotic kingdom fell in at 1045, right? And most Armenians were driven into the west and the south, fleeing before the incoming Seljuks and the Turks. They really spread, and then before that, before the 10th century, the Byzantines settled many Armenians around the valley of the Orontes, that is, their colonies, Armenian military colonies, that increased in time. So, when this was happening at that time, suddenly something changed. The aristocracy fell. There was no more aristocracy. The Patradunis dispersed. The Arjunis flew away. The Sunnis were not in a good shape. New classes developed. Totally people from the Azad, or the Hedzel Azod as we call it. Also Tondrakians, heretical Armenians, heterodox Armenians. They all acquired lands. And they became important elements. Suddenly a word was created, a borderland word, a no man's land between a very broad land during the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries. They were militant Armenians of great powers. These spread into Syria. In other words, when the establishment fell, it didn't mean that Armenian political energy suddenly dispersed. On the contrary, new classes, new ways of adaptation, new struggles open. So when you open any Armenian history book, after the fall of the Patriotic kingdom, a period of 200 dark 2 centuries. These 2 centuries are the brightest in Armenian history, and they are a special period. I call it the Armenian intermezzo, or the interval between the fall of one kingdom and the rise of Cilicia in 1198. So in other words, there is not just only gaps because of ignorance, but there is falsification of Armenian history. Armenians became suddenly very active. By the way, if you read, for example, any historian in the history of Aleppo, in the early 11th century, there were 6 churches in Syria, 5 churches in Aleppo and 1 mosque. Who do you think went to those churches? Armenians. So suddenly Aleppo is nothing like we think it was. And then the story of Armenians, do you know that Armenians sold Antioch to the Crusaders? The Armenian Firuz is a well-known character. Why would he sell Antioch to the Christians? He being a Muslim Armenian. And so in other words, there is so much variety in Arab sources that everything you read does not hold, it does not match, it does not convince you. We have to start. This kind of new knowledge must be the property of the public. So we would know the kind of, the track record of Armenians in these parts of the world and so on. And I can go on and on, but anyway. The third volume is about, the second volume, half of second volume is on Cilicia history, a rewritten history of Cilicia, about of course from all perspectives. And then the third volume is about, first, the images of Islam among Armenians, especially the images of Muhammad, the Prophet. What have Armenians written about the Prophet? How have they seen him? How do they understand? And then Greco-Latin, so on and so forth. The first part is really very, very, one of the toughest parts of this whole trilogy. I concentrated on the cultural scientific interactions. I took the city of Erzincan, or they call it Erzincan, because I found text there. I found, for example, that during the 13th century, an Armenian priest, Hovannes Erzincanci, had borrowed or translated the entire Versailles Safa for the episodes of the Brethren of Purity, and simply given it called Idachkati Masazirat Krot Karyal Pan. In other words, views collected from the writings of Islamic philosophers. The Sena Shadyan, who was the director of the Madinat Taran before this one, he was the editor. He did not bother to define who are these Dajik Mastasir, who are they. So I identified them. I brought up where it came from. I also did an entire research of several years on the urban brotherhood organizations, Futuwa organizations, among us they called Experience-Impass, as in, and then their constitution. Again, I discovered that the constitution written for this year's was a literal translation from Al-Nasser, Caliph Al-Nasser's reform program, literal, using the same words. Sometimes he doesn't know the Armenian, he just puts the Arabic transliteration. So I found about 50-60 transliterated terms. Also, I discovered that poetry, Constantine Erzincanci, the poetry of Constantine Erzincanci, whom people think is just a spiritual love poet, is nothing but part of Arabic poetry. And I brought up extreme and great similarities with local Arab poetry of the Futuwa organizations or the youth organizations of the cities. So cosmopolitanism was there, and then urbanism is another paradigm we have to understand. In other words, in cities people interacted in many different ways than they did in provinces. We never really realized that Armenians who lived in the cities, so-called, there were no Armenian cities by the way. All the cities were under Arab rule. Armenians never ruled in the cities. The cities were always under Arab emirs. Even though the majority of the population could be Armenian, but they are under, and then the structure is Islamic, by the way. This is why interactions happen there. So we never really think about cities as separate from provinces. Anyway, let me read my conclusion. If historical writing is essentially an activity of self-knowledge, both on collective and individual levels, then it is an existential quest that should recognize no boundaries, no constraints. I should not be ashamed to discover stuff that people do not like. By the very force of its urgency, the quest should break through all that falsifies and obscures one's image of the true self. This study suggests paths to novel processes of reevaluation and reconceptualization beyond the narrow confines of mainstream histories, as well as other disciplines. I believe that the venture and the exercise of reevaluation will perpetuate newer and more dynamic ways of historical awareness on individual and collective levels. And only then better history will be written by generations to come. My work was just the beginning. And thank you.